would like to welcome everybody to the European Bildung Network Fireside chat on the Bildung situation in Belarus, in Ukraine, and in the Balkans. And our three wonderful guests tonight are Galina Veramejchyk, and I hope that I pronounced her name correctly. She will correct me later, I guess, if I did it wrong. Mihail Krikunov from Kiev, and Nikola Jurisic from Serbia, but not necessarily in Serbia, and you'll get the chance to talk about that in a few minutes. I would like to welcome everybody in the Zoom room, and I would like to welcome everybody on Facebook. We will start with a toast because we're in Europe, and it's always nice to welcome people with a toast and wish everybody a pleasant evening. So welcome. My name is Lene Rachel Andersen. I'm one of the co-founders of the European Bildung Network. And this is the third Fireside chat that we have hosted here in this fall of 2020. Tonight, we're going to hear about the situation in those three countries, as I just mentioned. And I would ask our members here to turn off their camera and their microphone so that we will just have the guests and myself on the screen. And while you're sort of backstage following the conversation, you have the opportunity of chatting, writing questions, coming up with suggestions, and our friend and colleague Esli will keep an eye on it. And in about an hour, we'll start opening for the questions and the comments from the chat here on Zoom. So welcome, Galina, Mihail, and Nikola. Before we get into the topic, I would like you to introduce yourselves briefly, where you are, what you're doing, and what your background is. And Galina, I would like to hand over the floor to you first.
Thank you, Lene. My name is Galina Veramejchyk. It was absolutely correct pronounced, yeah. I'm from Belarus, from Minsk, and I'm still here. And I am country director of DVV International in Belarus. It's a German organization, Institute for International Cooperation of the German Folk High School Association or Adult Education Association. So besides, I'm involved also in different projects and networks. At the moment, I'm member of the board of the European Association for Education of Adults as a representative of Belarus.
We're very, very happy to have you here. We're very happy that you're still around and active, and we're looking very much forward to hearing what's going on in Belarus. Mihail, please.
So my name is Mihail Krikunov. I'm from Ukraine. Actually, I'm now in the small city of Kamenets-Podolsky in the western part of Ukraine, where historically very well known, where I'm in the midst of not easy corporate training and leadership. So I'm trainer, educator, professor, entrepreneur, geologist by my first background, manager and specialist in complexity and in leadership on my second or third, maybe fifth, I don't know. So I'm trying to enter into any possible hole which is curious or interesting for myself and probably helpful for my country to have some new dimension. So that's why I'm in building in full sense.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And Nikola, please. Mic on, you need your mic. Nikola, you need your microphone. We still can't hear you.
Should be able to click on the bottom left. There.
Yes, I think you Nikola, try now, please.
Okay, let me try now.
Yes.
Fantastic. So I was just saying thank you, Lene, for orchestrating this and continuing to hold the torch for Bildung in Europe amongst the broader Bildung community. Pleasure to be here. My name is Nikola. As a short introduction, I wear two hats in life. One is the hat of my corporate work, and then the other hat in my service work. In my corporate work, I've been working in McKinsey & Company for 14 years now, where the topic that I've been exploring and bringing to corporate clients, to governments, and also to nations, mostly in the Middle East, but also across Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which is the region I cover, which is around cultural transformation at scale. How do we shift cultures at the level of hundreds of thousands or millions of people? And I've had the pleasure of working with hundreds of organizations and governments on that topic over the previous decades. I currently lead our Culture and Change service line, which is all the work we do in this region in McKinsey for the 90 countries in EMA. And I'm based in Dubai, and most of my time has been actually in the Middle East, which has been transforming very, very rapidly in the last 10 years. In particular, Saudi Arabia has undergone an incredible transformation from when I was first there 12 years ago to today, and I have a pleasure to have been a part of that. And in my service work, I focus very much on the Balkans and bringing these lessons to building values-driven societies, helping process collective trauma, and bringing the knowledge of folk Bildung and the tradition from the Nordics to the Balkans. So there I've had the pleasure of, over the years, connecting with many fantastic leaders, new generation of leaders who are coming up across the Balkans, who also share this vision. And this is also where I had the pleasure of connecting with Lene, Thomas, Mette, and Mihail, and the entire community here. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. It's wonderful to have all three of you here. And I have been looking so much forward to this. I've actually been to Minsk, to Belarus, thanks to Galina. She invited me to speak there for 2 years ago. I have not been to Ukraine, and I have not been to the Balkans. So I mean, these two areas are very unfamiliar to me, and even Belarus, of course, I only know it superficially, and I guess that's the situation for most of us in the rest of Europe. So I have asked all three of you to not necessarily prepare a presentation, but to say a few words about the situation of general education in your country, whether it's free for all or how that works, what's the access to libraries, theaters, and Bildung institutions and so forth, just so that the rest of us can get an idea of what is the situation in your country. And let's do it the other order, the other way around now. So I would like Nikola to begin. And perhaps, I mean, there are several countries now in the Balkans, so feel free to differentiate or just talk about one of the countries.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe starting with very basic. So literacy rates range from 93% in Kosovo to 99% in Slovenia. Serbia is 98%. So literacy in general is relatively high. When we're talking about tertiary education, it's about 20 to 30%, depending on which country. Slovenia, again, is a little bit on the higher end, and OECD average is 32%. So somewhat below the average of the most developed countries when we're talking about tertiary education. And about 80% of that is actually universities, 20% of it is technical colleges. So that's sort of the, if you will, the broader picture. Also, when we look at the period from after the Second World War until the 1990s, there was a huge burst of growth while Yugoslavia formed under the leadership of Marshal Tito. So there's a lot of legacy around contemporary art. A lot of theaters were built, a lot of art galleries were built, a lot of monuments, a lot of operas, and there was just big conference halls that can host major events. So we're still living in the legacy of that burst of, if you will, enlightenment. That was the latest, the latest in our history. Back in history, there was Dositej Obradović and the prosvetiteljstvo, which was hundreds of years ago, that really initially brought this idea of education to the region. And most recently, we're living in that legacy. Unfortunately, as we know, the 1990s have been, a resurgence of violence that very much looked like a smaller version of World War II in the region. and with many deaths and genocide, and a lot of terrible things happened. So unfortunately, we're still very much living in somehow a stuckness, a stuck energy in the region that has pervaded since the early 2000s. So there hasn't been much, major society-wide progress in this sense. Having said that, with the private sector and more youth coming in, there's a lot of creative spaces that are being created, and regeneration of big parts of Belgrade into creative spaces, and a mixing of the clubbing, music, and art scene, and sort of creative coffee shops, and sort of there's these kinds of things popping up, but it's still relatively limited compared to the scale at which it's that sort of renewal would be required to move society at scale towards a more creative direction.
And is it mainly in the major cities that, this development is taking place, or do you see it across the,
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a city.
Very much focused. Belgrade is sort of 30% of the population of Serbia, and growing over time. There's still a deep, sort of urbanization phenomenon. I know that COVID is now starting to kind of shift that, mega trend, and hopefully it will have a more permanent impact. There's something in Novi Sad, there's something in Niš, the two other major cities, one in the north, the other one in the south, but very limited in the other cities.
Well, thank you very much. See, I already learned something tonight, so this is also what we're here for. So, thank you, Mihail. Please, Ukraine. What's going on?
Oh, a lot of things going on, because the building concept is totally unknown in Ukraine. So as well as in on Balkans and Serbia, as well as Belarus, I do believe, we in this sense are covered by some shadow of Soviet Union, still covered. In this sense, even taking into account that the concept of Bildung was known in Ukraine in 19th century, because we had here very actively operated those days society, so-called prosvita in Austro-Hungarian part, now part of Ukraine, western part of Ukraine. Now some part of our population could only remind themselves or relate some concepts after introduction of Bildung to, as Nikola told us, enlightenment. So 19th century's concept, so it is taken as old-fashioned, totally irrelevant to the contemporary, so-called contemporary world reality. So illiteracy and lack of awareness. So that's why we have a lot of work to do to bring the understanding into the mass. If talking about education, I probably could serve as an expert, because I am twice rector in my recent past of university and business school, internationally recognized, and I'm involved in all the layers of education, except probably primary education, hopefully. And from that point of view, we have one of the toppest, probably, in numbers, level of literacy of our education, as well as in Belarus as well. Yes, but the main question for our society is, what is the quality of this education? Because it is in a state of a total transformation on all the levels right now, with attempts to gain the real understanding what academic freedom is, what is independence of university, what school should give to so-called customers, to society, and so on and so forth. Even you see, we have just one period, say 3 months ago, national methodics developed by independent experts in professional orientation for school children. So desire for qualitative education is very hard. That's why we have a state education which is still free of charge, no problems at all for entering any level of education. But at the same time, if you would like to get something of larger quality, which could open you a window to a scientific career, to business career, and so on, to some professional career, you probably have to pay money because it is related to a private sector, which is growing, booming right now, frankly speaking, because we have hundreds of networked private schools of very good quality with tens of millions of US invested in every school by the boards, investors, and so on. So it is evident. Now, a new minister proposed to add 1 more year to our school education, to start teach children from the age of 5 years. You know, we have a terrible discussion right now in our society. But returning to Bildung, it is a very dangerous moment right now, because the old, I would say, forces in our society, in our Ministry of Education, are making a huge efforts to get a law on adult education accepted and enforced. And after our expertise, we concluded that it is something we never have to allow to appear, you know, because we are entering in a field where self-education, where not informal and non-formal should be informal and non-formal, and should lead our people to truly responsible, mature state of mind. That's why we created a initiative group, which is promoting a Bildung concept. We already created a concept, and we're hardly working right now under creation of Bildung library in Ukraine to translate the main books, main works in this field, and to distribute them intensively through all the layers of our society. And now it is close to finish as a concept already.
I'm gonna stop you here because we're gonna hear more about that in a moment. I'm gonna pass on the word.
Okay.
So I guess we have an image of what goes on in Ukraine with regards to education.
A lot of, and the society is still in a very dramatic change right now.
Yeah, thank you. Galina, Belarus. What is
Belarus?
Yeah.
Actually, we have a lot of in common with Ukraine and partly with Balkans, because our education system was formed during the Soviet period. So, and some characteristics are still in place, and thanks to that, we have quite high level of education in our country. As already Mihail said, literacy rate is really high, 99.6. We have even less than 0.5% of illiterate people. Yeah,
that's better than Denmark, I would have to say. So
Human Development Index is also very high. Probably the last position was number 50 for Belarus, and quite well-developed education system with a relatively good quality of education. 2 years ago, for the first time, Belarus participated in international study PISA for school children, and we have had from 36 till 38 position. It's quite a good, even some countries, members of the European Union, have a little bit worse result if you compare with Belarus. Traditionally, Belarusian people are very proud if you speak about education, because accessibility is also quite higher. More than 85% of small children are involved in kindergarten and schools, kindergarten. And if you speak about accessibility, it is important to say that still education in Belarus is very centralized, and thanks to that, and free of charge, mostly until the higher education. So university level, there is a combination. So, but thanks to that, we have quite more or less the same standards. If we'll speak about education, doesn't matter where you live, in the city, big city, or in rural area. For school children, you have this chance to join state programs free of charge and have a more or less comparable education. But from the university level, at the moment, we have like a combination. People could choose if you are quite good, you can pass exam and study free of charge. But in some cases, or you prefer to go to some private university, as Mihail already explained us on the case of the Ukraine, how it could look like. And more than half of students on this university level, they belong to this group, people who pays for education. So it means so. And maybe from this point of view, accessibility, biggest problem is in this field, adult education, because as a part of common concept, state policy still stay by very pragmatic approach to adult education. It means adult education is supported only and exclusively for purpose linked to labor market and so some vocational skills. So, and from this point of view, non-formal education is a little bit out of the state educational policy, but nevertheless, during the last 25 years, a lot of non-state initiatives were started, both by commercial organization, private sector in education, and non-commercial like NGOs. And until today, from my personal point of view, such initiatives, they actually could act as a base or some background for the future development of all educational system in Belarus. So, because there are places for innovation and approbation of different approaches, which could bring a lot of new results, new ideas.
Thank you. So for those of our viewers who have not been to Belarus, and not a lot of people have, I would have to say, if you think of Belarus as the sort of old-fashioned Soviet Union, where people did not have access to Beatles records and jeans and American commercial stuff, you have to revise your concept of Belarus, because when I was there, I've never seen so many casino commercials or stores in the main street with Hugo Boss and Apple store, we call it Humac, and all the brands that we have in the West. And everybody is on Facebook and Twitter. So the information highway has definitely made it to Belarus. And one of the things that I personally has been very impressed with in the recent movement for a different kind of Belarus has been all of the singing. I mean, there's so much culture going on in Belarus. So maybe you could add a few words about that. I need your mic on, yeah.
I think actually it's also in some way Ukraine has the same situation because, and many countries of Eastern Europe, because it was a challenge for us after that Soviet Union was collapsed, trying to, in very short time, trying to integrate many things what people in Western countries have already done during the past years, decades. So, and
like 3 generations, yes.
Yes, some things were done very successful, some things are still in progress. I think we will speak about it later. But if you will speak about culture, from my point of view, culture was during the Soviet period also was supported by state. Quite strong support has had, but at the same time, culture was not really independent and was not really free. It's the same like education. So, and if the state is going to control everything, in this case, culture as well as education could be not very able to follow recent development and actual challenges. So, and what we have done during the last maybe 20-25 years, of course, we tried to combine, and maybe it is exclusively in Belarus, we tried somehow to combine this old-fashioned approach what we have had from the Soviet time, and somehow to be open for new development. It works. It worked somehow until now. Okay, but nowadays we can really see and follow this problem where different understanding of ideas for the future could bring to some kind of, I will say, even civic conflict. Of course, it's not a mini world war, but it's internal conflict within our country. And from my point of view, a lot of things in this internal conflict are based on this different understanding of our future and different understanding of values. And
I can see that both Mihail and Nikola agree here. What are your reflections on this?
Yes, I can agree, because, you know, frankly speaking, I'm honored to be here in this space together with Galina, because, you know, all our hearts right now are with Belarus, because the drama which is playing right now in Belarus reminds us what happened to us in 6 years ago. And it is what Nikola called a legacy. You know, we are constantly fighting the past, and this fight, which is very unusual in Belarus case, because it is civil, you know, unrest, which is not related with the force. Which is very strange for us, because we are much more emotional, the kind of people. But we have this civic divide in our society as well, because the last elections showed us that 72 to 76% of our voters, our population, are somewhere in very strange place where they're expected for somebody to solve the problem, you know, but not participated. And it is a joint, a common legacy for our countries. unfortunately, which we could probably solve only through dealing with egg, not the chicken, the education.
Nikola.
Just to build on, Galina, one thing that you said at the end that really resonated with me is that you said at the end that you don't really have a common aligned vision of the future, and also what kind of culture you would like to have. And that's that's very much alive in the Balkans, this we can call regressive energy of pulling us back to the battle of the Blackfriars 1389, and the time of the Turks and all the historical trauma that's present there. But of course, the only way to move forward is to have an aligned view of the future and actually put an effort over time, consistently, coherently, all together in the same direction. And we're and starting with what are the values that we would, you also mentioned values, what are the values that we would like to bring more to life? What are the values that we want to stand for in the future, and how do we bring those values to life through the different systems of the family, the education system, the media, the spiritual and religious institutions, and so on and so forth. And that's all work, that there are approaches and ways of doing that, and that are, we also have the great example of what happened in the Nordics, but it all starts with aligning, what kind of culture would we like to have? What values do we really yearn for, so that we can jointly work on bringing them to life through all the different systems in our societies.
So if I'm gonna, reflect on that, part of the process that you're in is really finding your identity as a country, I suppose. And so what is, where you are in your position in that country, where do you, what do you do about it, or who are you working with, or what are the sort of hooks or handles that you have to grab and work with? Feel free to.
Okay.
Who wants to go first?
Maybe I can start. I was laughing when Mihail was introducing himself, because we both are from the Soviet time, and actually my first education also is in this field. I graduated from Mining Institute in Russia, and I studied like a land survey. I think it's the right name in English, but it's very close to this topic what Mihail already mentioned. And I think traditionally for Soviet time, and still for many former Soviet republic, such kind of position as education has to be, or Bildung has to be outside of the politic, was very typical. And according to that, education, teachers, administrative staff was always somehow trying to be outside of political life. Even in early 19, when we have had a short time of more freedom, so even at that time, many people from pedagogical society or from pedagogical community was not really active, at least in Belarus. And actually, education system was and still is for many citizens in Belarus as a part of very conservative system. And it was the reason why, for me personally, I was never able, as I was young, to imagine that I will be dealing in this field, education. My mother was a teacher, and when she tried to discuss with me my future, my answer was always never. Education, never. So, but what was happened later when the Soviet Union was collapsed? Once I have learned something about non-formal education, participated in one small event, and I was so surprised that during such non-formal processes, you can learn a lot, and learn both not only some subject, some topic, but also to learn how you can improve yourself and improve your colleagues, friends, and so on. And it was a reason why we have started here in Belarus to organize a lot of movements, organizations, initiatives in this field, and try to support this process, probably somehow to support process of national self-identity building. So, and for Belarus has a quite difficult history, and from this point of view, and many of us are still thinking that our national identity is very weak. And I will say that non-formal education, first of all, has contributed a lot during the last 25 years to building process of this national, not only national identity, I will say it contributed a lot to the feeling of belonging to this country and belonging to one group, which is like not homogeneous, but very close to each other. And what we can see this year during such a quite high level of protests here in Belarus, that people finally are going to support each other, and they are not really interested in what state policy is going to do. They are only interested to be together, to agree common goals, and to reach these goals. Yeah.
Okay, on this point, our similarities are finished, you know, because because the state of our country for at least last 6 years, but frankly speaking, last 20 years, since 1991, is exactly related to the building identity, national identity. And the peculiar point is that the word national, even not ethnic, because it's not related to ethnical differences, frankly speaking, because what started in 25th year, in 2014 became shaped as a political nation in which any kind of ethnicity have been finding their destiny, their identity related to this new kind of state. But for this, unfortunately, we have to be placed in the middle of a war, you know, with much more mighty counterpart, I would say. Yeah, and all what is normally related to old world, so ethnicity, folklore, language, and so on and so forth, now are tools for political nation to shape the identity, new one identity. We have almost no discussion inside the major part of our society where our country should move to Europe, you know? And
so I have a question with regards to these, you know, folklore and traditions and language and so forth. Because my impression, looking at it from the outside, was that the Soviet Union tried to, get rid of as much of the local heritage in different places. So how has that survived, and where do you go to find it now?
In the Soviet time, Kiev, our capital, was known informal name, a soft and cozy underbelly for Soviet bureaucracy, So for some people who worked until some retirement, then to find a soft and cozy living in a Kiev without any kind of problem. So this almost, I don't know, picturesque but sleepy town now is booming with totally new life. So how it is survived? Because of individuals, because of people, because of memories which were informally, in some sense even formally, stored and passed from one to another through networks of links, of relationship, because almost all organizations which have to restore and develop this kind of memory, historical memory, were in very weak and unsupported financially condition. Right now, it's totally changed because the young people in every part of Ukraine right now are speaking Ukrainian, and which was still very often is very unusual and unexpected for their parents. And it is reaction for that decision, knowingly made decision, to become a part of political nation, to create our own environment for their future children, because it's a matter of proud, it's a matter of self-respect, I would say. And for this, a long line of people had a very difficult life. They lost very often life in a struggle with the system before. And it is very interesting change, dramatic, I would say, change in perception of such people from a Soviet, they are bandits, Bandera and so on and so forth, to they are those kind who fight it for independence and for truly self-directed future. It is very unusual and uneasy process, and we probably would have and will have years and years of this difficult relationship and problem, but the first steps are made, So
it is just it's striking me as we speak that at least the two of you, Galina and Mihail, kind of grew up with Russian and the Soviet Union, but also the Russian language and the Russian culture as sort of the point of gravity. And now, we're speaking English now, so you have, literally sort of moved the point of gravity to the other side of the, land mass. And I'm very impressed, actually. It's just striking me right now as we're speaking that you're not only, changing the political system, it's like a whole shift of focal point and balance that is going on. And I guess that a new generation, of course, is shifting in that same direction.
One more moment, very small. Both of us, I'm very pleased, Galina, that you mentioned your background. So we're educated in Moscow. The question is why? Because the best children of our families dreamed about the best education which they can get only in two cities in Soviet Union, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, in Leningrad, And we go through a very dramatic change of our perception of our values. So now when I'm speaking to Russian specialists, very well known, maybe cream, very often I can catch them on some interesting moments where they still are in the past.
Yeah.
They're
Products
still catch-
of the Soviet system.
Yes. So you asked me and Galina a very difficult question. Why does this happen to us? Steadily, step by step, with the contacts, with the eyes opened, with visits, with the hard work. But it is probably an explanation that building is not about an easy receipt. When you in a half a year, half an hour, maybe an hour, could get a juicy and fruity, cake you can eat with the pleasure. It's a hard job, and how to involve simple people into hard job of changing their mind and making them responsible for their own life. I don't know. The explanation, we dreamed about your example, a building example, will prove its value and its force as a transformational technology, So that's why we are looking at building with such high level of interest right now.
Nikola, the transformation of culture and the sort of shift from one mental place to the other and different value systems, that's kind of your department.
Yeah, happy to share a little bit around that, and also a little bit around what's happening in the Balkans, because I do recognize that there's more historical and geographical proximity between Ukraine and Belarus than perhaps directly the Balkans. So I mean, I think Lene, you sort of hit it spot on when you said it's around identity, and a lot of the challenges and the disagreements in the Balkans are around, we are descendants of these people and we are descendants of these even earlier people who were there, and therefore we're the real people of the Balkans. And it's really that search for identity that even fuels a lot of the ethnic violence. The war in the Second World War was largely a civil war compared to the first, and obviously the wars in the 90s were also largely civil. So that sort of othering that then created in search of identity, when you're looking for who am I, and you're unable to answer that question, and your mind naturally then goes to, well, I'm not him, and I'm not him. So then you start saying who you're not rather than who you are, and that creates us versus them type divisions, which are very archetypical in humanity, if we look at back thousands and tens of thousands of years, and can very easily, become inflammatory. And once you other someone, the whole concept of othering, then you make them non-you. They're not a part of your tribe anymore. They're no longer human. And therefore, it's perfectly rational to do anything to them, including genocide. And this whole energy of othering is, in a way, a manifestation of the inability to find own source of identity within oneself, which is what building is all about. Building is all about finding your quote-unquote inner compass, as I believe you called it at one point in the book. So there's sort of a really interesting dynamic that's playing out here. And I think, Mihail, when you sort of named this, that building is really a concept that's quite new, I think that's also very, very true for the Balkans. And in about 8 years of exploring and talking to many, many people, I've noticed about 5 sort of, I can call them bright spots in the system of where this might take root. And it's certainly not the political system. And Anastasia, I saw your comment around, politics is too important to be left to the politicians. And a part of me agrees with that. And a part of me was also considering joining politics when many of my McKinsey friends, one of my friends from McKinsey became Minister of Finance in the government, and then basically all the rest of them went to government. This was about 6 years ago. And I was even in discussions at one point to be mayor of Belgrade. And it became very, very clear that this is not the path, because the whole political system is all about survival. The whole engine, the whole energy of the system is brilliantly geared towards its own survival. And it's very, very difficult to bring in any kind of progressive, creative, future-focused energy when you're in that day-to-day firefighting mode. The energy is just stuck there. It's very hard for that energy to project forward months, let alone decades, which is required for the type of vision that the leaders in the Nordics had in the 19th century, in the 1850s, when they started this multi-decade program and process to build character, on the level of nation. But there are 5 bright spots. One of them is certainly tertiary education. In particular, the dean of the Belgrade University of Economics is a very, very values-driven person. And while a lot of the education system has become very sort of, paying for exams type system in many universities, there are some universities like this one, which have really stayed true to integrity and are really sort of radiant role models of integrity and values. And we're in discussions now and have also applied together with our friends in the Nordics to get some funds with Erasmus Plus to start a leadership program, world-class leadership program like you would do at IMD or INSEAD or Harvard, and bring it to the economics faculty of Belgrade, and then take it to all economics faculties across the region, and then to all universities across the region. So that is something that would be a multi-year program, but this is moving. Secondly, in adult education, there's quite a lot of things like the Belgrade Open School, BOS, and there's similar institutions across the rest of the Balkans that are getting a lot of EU funds to educate young adults, mostly young adults, but sometimes also adults. Unfortunately, it seems to be that it's mostly the same group of, a few thousand people that are attending most of these courses. It hasn't really been able to go to the folk Bildung part of it. It's still limited to parts, but still, I can say that's one bright spot. Then thirdly, there are some practitioners, leading practitioners in different fields, sort of NLP, coaching, therapy, like Jungian therapy, personal development, coaching, different healing modalities, in particular, Theta healing is big in the region. I mean, there's a lot of these practitioners that are doing actually great work. Many of them are training, hundreds of therapists every year. And the challenge with connecting with these people, I found, in general, they're very successful, very busy, and have very good lives. Being rich and successful in the Balkans is actually a great life. So many of them I found actually don't have a lot of interest to engage with us around, now we're trying to change society, and it's a lot of time and effort that's required, and their political capital and so on. So I've actually been a little bit disappointed, I have to say, by most of these leaders who have relatively myopic view. I'm successful in this, I'm training a couple of thousand people per year, and I'm happy to stay. I'm not willing to kind of do something greater together. Then the fourth one has been this whole area of sort of concerned citizens. And there aren't many, but there are some concerned citizens that are, educated and have passed through the lower levels of Maslow, if you will, and who are wanting to contribute. And on that point, just last week, actually, we launched the first laboratory exploring collective trauma in the Balkans. We have members from all Balkan countries, and we're working with Thomas Hubel, who has been working on collective trauma for almost 2 decades. And we're just exploring this topic of, understanding our collective trauma over the next 8 months. And then this will be obviously a multi-year process. So that's happening, and that's actually a very, very good positive development. And lastly, entertainment. So there's a few folks in the entertainment field, in particular Exit Festival, which has been named the best music festival in Europe twice. They get 400,000 people until this year per year attending their festivals live. They were the first force to bring youth of all the ex-Yugoslavia countries together after the wars in 2000 when there was the first festival. 2001, now they have 20 years of exit. And they're very, very much focused on building peace in the Balkans, bringing people together, concepts like Bildung. I introduced them to Thomas Bjorkman about 2 years ago, and we're developing certain ideas and programs of, what could we do at scale that could really, because they have access to millions of people in the Balkans. So there is some, just to name those 5 examples of what I've observed as bright spots, an element of the system that we can work with. But overall, I have to say it's very much focusing the energy on the emergence of new systems rather than trying to change the old systems as a meta reflection.
So, I mean, first of all, the power of music and aesthetics, and bringing people. Peace that touches something that is deeper than culture, politics, the current society, and the political system. I mean, that is about what it means to be human. So I'm first of all very happy to hear that these things are going on, because I wouldn't have known about this otherwise. I could have asked my colleague Thomas Bjorkman, who you mentioned, but we're not generally aware of this outside of the Balkans or outside of your region. So it's very uplifting to know that these things are going on and that there are projects trying to deal with this. You mentioned trauma. And I bet there is a lot, and I bet there is also a lot of trauma, both in Belarus and in Ukraine. And coming from Denmark, we kind of, figured that out 150 years ago, and I have not had to live with that. I have not had to deal with that. So it's a very foreign concept to me as a contemporary phenomenon. How much is that defining your work in Bildung? Is it a thing that you think about? Is it something that you try to avoid? Is it something that is just there? Is it like the elephant in the room, or can you just talk about it openly and let's get over it and focus on the topic at hand? I'm really curious because I don't know this phenomenon firsthand.
So let me just briefly touch on that first. So it's very interesting because if you look at the last 70, 80 years in the Balkans, most 40 or almost 50 of those years were a period of stability and peace under the values of brotherhood and unity, bratstvo i jedinstvo. Those were the 2 values of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And it's very curious that after almost 50 years of bratstvo i jedinstvo, you could have the 1990s happen. It's very curious. And the best reason I found for that is simply collective trauma. And I remember very well, I was actually in Singapore at the time when the war started. All the Croats and all the Bosnians and all the Serbs within a few weeks no longer talked to each other in our school in Singapore, international school, because I heard from my grandparents and relatives that they were killing us. And they heard that we were killing them. And literally, like, people were getting killed at the hands of the other. And then so the reason why I bring that in is because these emotional systems, once these emotional systems are triggered, within weeks, people who were neighbors, who owned the same bakery together, who went to the same school together, who knew each other for generations, all of a sudden are willing to go out and, kill the neighbor. And that's literally what was happening. And it's also, when we talk about war, war is killing the men and raping the women, but the raping the women is not talked about. It's also like a big thing that's, hidden. And this is the thing in trauma is, if you don't hear the whispers, you're going to have to hear the screams. And you have to talk about these things, simply have to find their way to get processed in some form. And this is now what we're also sitting with. We're also sitting with the remnants of the 1990s that have not been processed. There hasn't been a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like there has been in South Africa to have these conversations, to make amends in whatever form. And therefore, I believe that the first and primary imperative is working on our collective trauma. Because without this, we cannot go on and build values-driven societies and implement the concepts of Bildung. So in a way, we only need to do two things. It's simple, but it's not easy. We need to process our collective trauma, and we need to build a values-driven society. And then we're done. And this is also how, in a way, I see my work over the next 40 years. And if I'm able to contribute in any way to these two topics, you know, that's a life worth living.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Ashley in a moment, but before I do that, Galina and Mihail, do you have anything you would like to add to this, or should we start looking at the chat? Because I see there are some really interesting questions and comments.
Galina, just small note. After your question on the cultural aspects, you know, what is driving right now the transformation of Ukraine? The answer, if you will ask me this question, so my answer will be very unusual probably. And new Ukrainian music, new Ukrainian music. It's unexpectedly bright, unusual, very brave. And it is a reflection of this sense of time, you know, and the music such as Beatles or rock music for Soviet Union sometimes. It is a wind which is moving people ahead. This scent, this understanding of time, that small additional notes to what you asked Nikola about. And I never forget my friend Pavel Daneyko from Minsk, when he gave me a CD of Belarusian, new Belarusian rock groups. It is in my collection, and I'm listening, still listening it. You know, it is again a new evidence of new time. What we are listening right now in Ukraine very often, Belarusian groups.
There's a Belarusian music scene that we're missing in Denmark, I can tell.
Probably I need to send some to Copenhagen. Yeah.
We'll have to explore this.
Actually, Lena, this question and this topic, collective trauma, I think we are very new and fresh in this situation. We are still in this conflict situation, but I'm sure that this conflict situation, collective trauma, will really have a big impact on education system. First of all, I would like to make a link to the comment of Anastasia. She wrote about politics and that actually we need to, sorry, how it was formulated, that actually we cannot, we need to use Bildung to make a change. And from my point of view, first of all, what we really need to do in education, we need to reflect not only position and role of educational institutions in all processes in our society, but also we need to reflect, to rethink this concept of Bildung, not of education, but concept of Bildung. And as I told from the very beginning, it was very common that in our understanding, education has not to have nothing common with politics. But I remember one very interesting book in German about Bildung. It was written on the first page that there are nothing more political than education. It means for me, if teachers are not speaking about politics, if politics is hidden somewhere, it is also politics. So, and from this point of view, first of all, I think we will need, I don't know, some kind of therapeutical process, and education has to be somehow involved, because we need to learn how to be more humanistic, how to be able to communicate with people with different view and different understanding, different ideas. It is not about ethnic, because we are quite homogeneous country. So it is more about values and position and understanding of our future. So
Thank you. Esli, you have been keeping an eye on the chat here. So welcome, Esli, on the screen. What's happening?
Yeah, thank you, Lene. Yeah, like a while ago, there was a very interesting point from Søren Sønderstrup, who asked about the role of political activism, which is something I think we haven't been talking about too much. And before we ask anyone to elaborate on it, I would like to ask Søren to maybe turn on his camera and like tell us a little bit more about where his question is coming from.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Søren.
Yes, I think I'm on. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to raise the question, which I think is quite relevant for the discussion as we stand right now. Let me see, where did I put it? Right, here's the question as I wrote it in the chat. What should be the role of political activism or hybrid forms of social movement for social change in reviving culture and building and Bildung in your society? Yeah, I think it very much touches on what you were talking about just now. So maybe bringing back the concept of political activism, not as something from the past, but as something new and reinvigorating, something fresh that can actually reshape and reinvigorate society. Is that possible at all?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Who would like to go first?
Oh, let me be the first. You know, a political activism for us is a new phenomenon, because the politics for so long time was very steady, very stable, dealing with or moved and engined in a sense by the same person, same roles. Now we have the situation when to every another election campaign, we are dealing with a totally new set of political forces created recently, you know, and adjusted to the moment, and with the more and more energy and opportunities which are disseminated to agriculture and maybe not metropolitan areas of our country. We have small parties in every oblast, every region of Ukraine. So it is closely related to civil birth and strengthening of civil society. So the political activism is an outcome of these processes in our country. It is related with a more shared understanding that you as a citizen can and could be involved in an active political process to change the life for your family and so on. So I would perceive this, your questions that about political activism in a sense that in our country, political activism is a new and very interesting idea and type of behavior which is changing our political landscape.
Thank you. Galina, Nikola? Any comments?
Yeah, I can build on that briefly. I think there's Yeah, there's something really interesting in sort of the link between political activism and democracy, and very much how the systems now work in the Balkans is, you know, you have ministries and, you know, they have policy making divisions, they make decisions, and then that kind of feeds through to the people who execute. And what a politically rich, fertile soil would look like is that flow of information would actually be going upwards, and then there would be some processes up here to process that information in consultation with the people who are in the actual industry. So the entertainment industry can shape its own policies, education can shape its own policies, and not everyone needs to be involved, but perhaps people that have, you know, feel the charge or have the most expertise about specific topics. So it's a much more co-creative, evolutionary process. And I can certainly say that, you know, in the Balkans, but in particular Serbia, which I know best, it's very much this top-down approach, and these dictates still come from the center and are not even questioned. There isn't even an appeal process, let alone, you know, a co-creation process. So it's very, very far from having, you know, a rich, politically active, you know, fertile soil.
Galina?
It's a very interesting question. I was thinking about it, how it is related to different social movement and NGOs or civil society in Belarus. When I was trying to remember a lot of non-governmental organizations started to offer some kind of educational program for new leaders, for activists in local societies, local communities, and so on. And we tried to contribute, but at that moment, probably our society was not ready. And what we can see nowadays in Belarus, it's somehow connected. Here, I'm not really agree with Anastasia. It is somehow connected with our collective trauma, but at the same time, finally, many people have understood that actually political activism is also one way to change. And what is more important, many people nowadays could believe that they can do it, because probably 5-10 years ago, mostly Belarusians, when you will ask, will answer, no, it is not for us. But today, many people are ready to be political activists. And of course, we need somehow to discuss, to think about reasons and what was contributing to this process. But I think actually there are different tendencies which allows us to be more independent as a persons and to be more ready to take different roles in the society. And yeah.
So, Mihail, you said the word civil society, and Galina, you also mentioned it. And I think that whenever we talk about democracy, there's a tendency to think of it at the nation state level, because that's where we get the legislation, that's where we have our passport and our human rights are protected or not protected. But at the local level, I mean, at municipality level, or if you start an association or you get engaged in, could be political activism, but it could also be, you know, fixing up your local community and creating community gardens or something like that. What is the situation for this kind of local, you know, personal involvement in your neighborhood, in your countries? And Søren, thank you for the question.
Interesting, because you know the entire process started in 2014. Started with a huge wave of volunteering and volunteer organization, which solved in main part unsolvable problem of recreation of army and creation resistance to what happened to our country in eastern part and so on. It is related to trauma, Nicholas, because we lost more than 10,000 of our people and still keep on losing people on daily basis, you know. But what interesting, we just finished, almost finished, because we still have the final results from our election. But what is distinctive for this campaign, it is that the main interest was in the regions, not in a central part, not in the capital, you know. And all country followed with high level of interest who will win the election process for mayor in Lviv, in Rivne, in every particular, not largest probably cities of Ukraine. It is a reflection of decentralization process, which is evident right now, because it gives money to the self administration on the places, in regions, and the volunteering or political activism right now is even more active. Excuse me for sorry for this. Not in capital city, but in small cities where people are forming their own parties, their own leaders, and it is very intensive fight, I would say, for a completely reformulated in their minds, in the people's mind, understanding of what politics is, that it is about their life here,
and there,
not
I mean,
somewhere there.
Right, and there's a lot of Bildung, there's a lot of education that comes from being active in these organizations.
And very strange is, you know, what is the highest possible demand for courses right now in our country, for both on corporate level, city level, small village level, even cabinet of ministry level, a critical thinking.
We can use some of that in my part of the world, I have to say. I think everywhere. Yeah. I could also come to think of a continent on the other side of the Atlantic where that might be really useful. Yeah. Galina and Nikola, the local political activism or the neighborhood level, is that something that happens in?
Both yes and no. Yeah. During the last maybe 5 years, the number of local groups who was involved in different kind of projects, initiatives, trying to do something together to, I don't know, create some sport group or to organize some cultural activity or other project together with children and so on. Was really developed, this movement, of course, at the moment when this conflict situation is actually very dramatic for many regions. The number of local initiatives is a little bit lower, but at the same time, what we can see that this protest movement is directly connected with some actions which could be considered as a part of local activism and common work of people, because quite a famous story about the capital in Minsk, that many houses have built together like a small indoor place for collective action. For example, just to have during the evening time small concert, or to get together to have a cup of tea and some, I don't know, cookies and so on, or to play some sport games. And of course, because many people belonging to this protest group of our population, they're trying to use this protest symbolic. And for today, it is really political thing for Belarus, because local government recognized such activities as a very dangerous for whole country. And a few days ago, it's a recent development, local government of local administration of the city Minsk even took special decision about special places in our capital where administration have to control all local activities. It's incredible what kind of absurd situation we could have. And the next, for example, such kind of local activism, very easy. This is very simple example. For example, with this protest flag, white, red, white, and many people just
Nikola, would you like to? I lost Galina here. Do we still have sound?
Yeah, so from the Balkans perspective, don't have a lot to add, and I also admit I'm not very deep in this particular field. But from the data points that I have, I would say limited. Unfortunately, this type of local volunteerism does require a certain mindset that requires people to be taking ownership for improving their own lives and their own community. And broadly, most people are still in the mindset of, if we can call it the blame mindset, which in a way is the opposite of the ownership mindset, which is blaming, society, the government, the Turks, NATO, this sort of externalizing, external locus of control, what they call in psychology, versus the internal locus of control, which is, a radical focus on what I can control. And I would hypothesize that, if I had some data to show on this, that it would be actually quite limited in terms of really sort of, ground root activism. It would be sort of the general, let someone else make it better, for me. And if it's not better, I'll sit there and complain. And, that's not true for everyone, obviously, but unfortunately for a majority, it would be accurate to some degree.
I'm very happy to see Galina back on the screen now. So
sorry for that. Probably I was too dangerous.
I think that thought crossed our minds, but nobody said anything. But we're very happy that you're back. So you will behave for the rest.
Feeling,
You will have to behave for the rest of the evening, okay?
We'll see. Nobody knows.
Ashley, do we have one final question from the chat?
Yeah, and I'm also looking at the time, so I'll try to pose it a bit like as a not so open-ended question, but there was also some discussion about the role of technology next to political activism in the chat, and what role technology can play in, for example, dealing with collective trauma or building national identities. And maybe to all three of you, very briefly, in a few sentences, do you think technology has a positive influence and can help people to, obtain those values, or is it rather a challenging factor here? And maybe Nikola, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I think, you know, like technology, like any tool, it depends on, you know, who's wielding the tool and what are you doing with the tool. We've had some experiences in our work in the Balkans that some that are encouraging, some that are less encouraging. So the more encouraging signs are that some of the leading e-learning portals that have hundreds of thousands of people signed up have already partnered with us and translated courses like Richard Barrett's Leading a Values-Driven Life, which was launched 2 weeks ago and has received very high ratings. And that's an example where we say, okay, great, you know, this is really like we're bringing new forms of education to the masses actually for free. This course is for free. And then if this goes well, we'll broaden that participation out. The less encouraging examples is an example. There's this initiative called this was in Serbia, the Digital Serbia Initiative, DSI, which are basically 20 leading institutions in the country that have come together to make sure that Serbia wins in the fourth industrial revolution. That's their goal. So they have a lot of programmers, a lot of techies, a lot of, you know, leading IT and tech companies. And what we wanted to do with them is create a diagnostic tool that looks through all the secondary metadata. So think of all the posts on social media, on all the information that comes through the newspapers, and then basically a web crawler that analyzes all that data using AI, and then basically says, what is the degree to which this is blame language versus taking ownership language, and can give you on a daily basis a metric and saying 99% of the information, because this is it's forming the mindset and the outcomes in the country. So what is the quality of the information flowing through the system, and to what extent is it progressive forward-looking or regressive forward-looking, for example. So we define these what we call meta mindset, but unfortunately they really didn't understand what the hell we were talking about. And literally, I mean, I flew many times there to have meetings, and at the end it just didn't resonate. They said, yes, we can make this program and we can make this AI, but they really didn't understand what the purpose of this was, and lost energy over time.
So
it was actually very disappointing.
What was the purpose? I mean, what did you want to learn from the data? I mean, what? Right.
So the thought is, what
Briefly.
is the information creates mindsets, like ways people think, and ways people think, mindsets create outcomes, behaviors and outcomes in the society. So if we want to go back down to the root cause, we need to understand what is the quality of the information flowing through the system. And this tool was meant to be a diagnostic, ongoing on a daily level on what is is it Bildung, this information more towards Bildung, or is it regressive?
Okay, so
Right,
it was
to
more like
oversimplify.
taking the emotional temperature on the country.
Yeah, taking the emotional temperature of the country, so we can say, are we then having impact with all the other work we're doing? So this was the idea. The idea was to create a meta metric that would then give us on a societal level an idea, are we moving towards a Bildung type society, or are we moving away from a Bildung type society?
So I will hand over the microphone to Mihail here. We're about to conclude.
Yes.
Nikola, you're a lucky idealist, you know. So the situation is much more complex. It's a dream of mathematician, you know, to have this national dashboard which will tell you what happened. We will never knew it, you know. We can only, you know, outside all the algorithm, all that hope for technology, it's a basic problem of understanding of the preparedness of and preparation level of readiness of human mind, which is not related to the technology itself. But it's good news for education because what we knew recently from all this huge wave of MOOCs and e-learning and so on, which it is not sufficient for quality and for understanding.
And on that note, I'm gonna ask all of our participants to join us for concluding this evening. And I don't know if I dare hand over the microphone to Galina. I mean, you never know what's going to happen if we do it. So I would like everybody to to join us. And I would like to thank all of our guests, those of you being active in the chat, those of you on Facebook, those of you in the Zoom room. And then I would like to thank Mihail Krikunov for participating, and Nikola Jurisic for participating, and Galina Veramejchyk for participating. And if you have one final word, Galina, Nikola, Mihail, for our guests, I'll let you have it, and then we'll conclude.
You know, I would propose a toast for something not mentioned today, not related to the technology. I hope will never be related to technology. To love.
Cheers to that. Nikola or Galina, one final word before we turn off the Facebook link.
Technologies definitely contributed to the Belarusian revolution, because it is a revolution of very well educated people who is really very good with technologies. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nikola, you get the last word here.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, this work is multi-generational, multi-decade work. And one time someone asked me, you know, Nikola, what are you willing to keep failing at for the rest of your life? And I think this work is worth failing at for the rest of my life.
And cheers to that. And thank you for joining us tonight. And for those of you who are on Zoom, we continue at the Zoom bar for another half hour. And to those of you on Facebook, thank you for watching, and good night.
Cheers.
Cheers.